Deep in the waters of American imagination, the mermaid has always swum just beneath the surface. Not quite human, not quite beast. She has drifted through centuries of folklore, show business, and spectacle, never fully submerged, yet never entirely seen. While mermaids often evoke European myth or Disney fantasy, the creature's American afterlife is darker, more complicated, and intimately tied to ideas of deception and longing and spectacle.
I saw when I was halfway down a thing that made me laugh. They'd made a clothesline out of the Atlantic Telegraph. The old mermaid, she came to me with a salt tear in her eye. She said, when you're 10 miles underwater, it's a very hard matter to dry. Down in the diving bell at the bottom of the sea, there lived a pretty mermaid the fishermen liked to see. Down in the diving bell at the bottom of the sea, nice little mermaid, pretty little mermaid, off came courting me. Once I caught the pretty fish, to kiss her was my...
One of the earliest American cultural encounters with mermaids was not in the realm of fantasy, but in the carnival tent. In the 1840s, showman P.T. Barnum introduced the public to what he called the Feejee Mermaid, a grotesque taxidermy hybrid of monkey and fish parts, all stitched together with wire and a little bit of imagination. To Barnum, it was a marketing ploy, but to his audience, it was proof of mystery, exoticism, and even scientific possibilities. As Stephen C. Levi argues within his article, Barnum's mermaid was not just a hoax in the traditional sense. It was a reflection of the public's hunger to believe in something stranger than truth. Quote, "The real magic of Barnum's mermaid was that people wanted it to be real." Unquote. This early American fascination with mermaids wasn't isolated to museums of curiosities. By the early 20th century, reports of real mermaid sightings began to circulate in small towns and newspapers throughout the eastern seaboard. In 1923, an article from the Nashville Tennessean described a, quote, fishwoman spotted off the coast. Her hair was long and green as seaweed. A decade later, in 1933, the Roanoke Rapids of North Carolina published a brief but breathless report of local men seeing a, quote, creature, half woman, half seal, unquote, disappear into the dark waters of North Carolina. Rather than being dismissed as fantasy, these accounts were often framed as matters of public curiosity. Perhaps hoaxes, yes, but not wholly outside the realm of possibility. Melissa Jones notes that the American mermaid became a vessel for cultural anxieties, a feminine body that was both alluring and dangerous, a being that signaled transformation, instability, and the unknowable. Unlike their European cousins, often tragic and romantic figures, American mermaids were elusive, uncanny, and always at risk of being commodified. They became metaphors for the country's own contradictions: expansion and loss, wonder and exploitation. In these early stories, the mermaid was not just a myth, she was evidence. Or rather, she was treated as evidence of something uncanny and unexplainable, and somehow just barely within reach. And in this way, the American mermaid became a product not only of folklore, but of print culture, visual spectacle, and even capitalist desires. In 1842, when the Feejee Mermaid arrived in New York City, not by ocean, but by steamboat and stagecraft, she was mounted on a wooden board and enclosed in glass. The creature bore little resemblance to the sirens of maritime myth. It was small, leathery, horrific. The top half of a mummified monkey and the bottom half of a fish, crudely and obviously sewn together. Yet for many 19th century Americans, it was nothing short of miraculous. The exhibit was the brainchild of P.T. Barnum, America's premier mythmaker, who understood that in a young nation still defining its identity, mystery could be monetized. Barnum paid a Boston seaman for rights to the mermaid's display, spun some crazy backstory about Japanese fishermen and British naturalists, and arranged for a fabricated letter from the fictitious Dr. J. Griffin of the, quote, British Lyceum of Natural History, unquote, to be reprinted within newspapers. The hoax was deliberate, yes, but it so was the desire to be believed. As Barnum himself later wrote, the mermaid was a lesson in the art of advertising, but also in human psychology. She was more than a spectacle. The Feejee Mermaid was a cultural barometer. It emerged at a time when Americans were reckoning with new ideas in science, evolution, and anthropology. These disciplines were still emerging from the shadows of myth and magic. Museums of the mid-19th century often blurred the lines between scientific education and sensational curiosity. In this space, the mermaid was neither proven nor disproven. She existed in the liminal zone. The public's fascination wasn't with the mermaid itself, it was with the possibility of it existing. What if such a creature did exist? What else might lie beneath the seas or beyond the frontier? In this sense, the Feejee Mermaid operated as a kind of speculative artifact, one that challenged the authority of science while also feeding it. The display's scientific aesthetic, glass case, Latin labels, curated lighting, mimicked the forms of truth even when the substance was hollow. As Levi notes, Barnum's real achievement was not deception, but participation. The viewer was complicit. They knew they were being tricked, or suspected as much, but they looked anyway. No longer a creature of the deep, she became a mirror, reflecting the shifting desires, fears, and fictions of the American people. The Feejee Mermaid did not vanish when exposed. She multiplied. Variants of her appeared in dime museums, traveling shows, and eventually state fairs. Even today, you can find her likeness in tourist shops and roadside attractions all across the country. She endures not because she was real, but because she asked a question the public never stopped asking. What if she was? Throughout the years and the decades before and especially following the Feejee Mermaid's debuts, reports of mermaid sightings began to surface with increasing regularity. Not within sailors' logbooks, but in the columns of American newspapers. These accounts, often brief and sensational, appeared in both major publications and regional broadsheets. They were stories of fishermen in Maine, bathers off the coast of Florida, or startled sailors off Cape Cod, who swore they saw a woman with scales, or a creature that sang before diving into the waters. What's striking is not the frequency of these sightings, but the seriousness in which they were sometimes reported. A headline from the St. Louis Globe-Democrat in 1883 read, "A mermaid seen on the Mississippi, fishermen astonished by her songs." Another from the Boston Daily Globe in 1895 told of a creature half woman, half seal, glimpsed off the coast of Nuant. Such stories, often printed without retraction, blurred the line between reportage and folklore. They weren't necessarily believed, but neither were they dismissed. In an era before rigid journalistic standards, such pieces functioned as cultural placeholders, myths wearing the mask of news. These newspaper mermaids occupied a different niche than Barnum's carefully staged hoax. They were not commodities enclosed in glass, but apparitions in the wild, raw and unconfirmed. Their appearances coincided with a time of social and environmental upheaval, industrialization, urbanization, and gradual erosion of maritime lifeways. In this context, mermaids became symbols of the disappearing world, haunting reminders of an older relationship between humans and nature. Crucially, the mermaid also began to shift in form and tone. By the early 20th century, she appeared less as a monstrous hybrid and more as a melancholic figure. In the New York Sun, in an 1899 column titled Sea Woman or Sea Lure, described as her beautiful and terrible, her eyes full of sorrow. This fusion of allure and lamentation speaks to the gendered tensions encoded within the myth. The mermaid, increasingly feminized in press descriptions, was often cast as a symbol of danger and desire. As the 20th century progressed, the mermaid slipped further from the surface and deeper into the cultural subconscious. No longer confined to the sideshow, nor contained within newspaper margins, she was reimagined in fiction, poetry, and feminist theory as a symbol of fragmentation, exile, and memory. What had once been spectacle became metaphor, and the mermaid herself, long objectified as a monster or marvel, began to speak. Melissa Jones traces this transition in A Mermaid's Tale, arguing that the mermaid's evolution in popular culture mirrors changing understandings in gender and autonomy. In early portrayals, she is an object of desire and dread, her song seductive, her body unnatural. But by the mid-20th century, particularly through children's literature and emerging feminist writing, the mermaid becomes a cipher for adolescent longing and the psychological cost of domestication. The tale of Hans Christian Andersen's Mute Mermaid, popularized in countless adaptations, becomes an allegory not only for the unattainable love, but of silent agency. In the 1993 essay, The Mermaid and the Memories, the author reflects on the mermaid as a vessel for cultural trauma, especially for women whose desires and identities and histories have especially been submerged. The mermaid, it is argued, remembers what others are asked to forget. In this reading, her song is not merely a lure, but a lament. The sea becomes a mnemonic device, and the mermaid is an archivist, beautiful and broken. Though often described as mischievous or cruel, mermaids are rarely triumphant. Instead, they haunt the edges of maps, of civilizations, of acceptable femininity. They live at the threshold, suspended between worlds. The pain of this in-betweenness makes them wise, and their songs, however sweet, are never without sorrow. And so the mermaid returns, no longer to the shore, but to literature, memory, and the margins of feminist reimaginations. Where Barnum once offered her as a spectacle, later generations reclaimed her as a symbol. This transformation does not erase her exploitive past, but rather refracts it in through new lenses of desire and grief and political power of mythmaking. The mermaid, like the coastline itself, is always shifting, carved by time, shaped by the tides, but never fully disappearing. In the American imagination, she has flickered between fakery and faith, between tabloid and oddity, and spiritual totem. From Feejee hoaxes to whispered sightings off Chesapeake Bay, her presence continues to haunt us, not because of what she is, but because of what she reflects back to us. Stephen C. Levi reminds us that Barnum's fabricated mermaid worked not only because of a sleight of hand, but because the audience already believed. In a world defined by colonial expansion and maritime mystery, the idea of a creature that was both woman and animal, both familiar and foreign, struck a powerful chord, and that chord still reverberates. By the late 20th century, as Melissa Jones outlines, the mermaid had become a site of symbolic recovery. No longer just a spectacle, she was a figure through which questions of identity, silence, and survival could be explored. So what does it mean that sightings of mermaids continue to dot American newspapers well into the 20th and even the 21st century? that children dress as mermaids, that performers don silicone tails in springs and roadside parks, that odd clippings are still saved and cited like scripture. Perhaps the Woman's Review of Books suggests it is because the mermaid is not a lie, but a longing. A mnemonic form of cultural grief. A way of remembering something that's always going to be just beyond out of reach. And so the question is not whether mermaids are real. The question is why we keep looking for them. Thank you so much for joining me today on this little visual exploration and our last episode in the Mermaid Summer series here at the Occultorium Historian Archives. I'm your guide, Sapphire, and I love that all of you are commenting, liking, and subscribing to the channel. It means so much. Thank you. Until next time, stay curious.